Welcome everyone to our Packers News Camp Chat alongside Pete Dougherty. I am Olivia Reiner. Just behind us this morning at Ray Nitschke Field, the Packers had a partially padded practice, a little different from yesterday. We'll explain the significance of that and why that matters in just a moment. Before we get into that, I want to remind you, you can, as always, be a part of our conversation. If you're over on Facebook, YouTube, or Periscope, leave us a question, leave us a thought, and we will get to some of those toward the end of our show today. Before we get into some of the updates from practice and some other position group news that we'd like to discuss, I'd like to discuss, Pete, something that's a little bit different. The Packers have released a new media policy when it comes to information that we're allowed to share with all of you out there, especially when it comes to both the depth chart and players that may be taking reps in certain places and going in a rotation. So that would include not sharing anything about first team, second team, or third team reps. Pete, what does this imply for what we can share to our viewers?
Well, it definitely curtails a lot how much we can share. Basically, they can do this because the league and the Pro Football Writers Association came to some agreements before camp started about some changes for this 1 year because of COVID and all the changes in protocols, who's allowed in the field, who's allowed to watch practice from the stands, all of that. And they gave teams the ability to limit reporting in a lot of ways if they wanted to. I'm just not sure how many teams are doing it like this. When we discussed this amongst ourselves after practice today, and Tom Silverstein had looked online, he looked up several teams, and it looked like they were still allowing reporters to report depth chart things and who's working where. And in fact, some of the teams themselves had actually posted videos of plays, practice plays, quarterback throwing a pass to somebody in 11 on 11. So while there's, they're doing it because they don't want to be at a competitive disadvantage. That's what they're saying, that other teams are not allowing this, so teams can learn more about their players just by reading media. You question how much teams can really get out of that, but even if they can, if nobody else in the league or not many others are doing it, then it's just a huge loss for Packers fans because the reporting just gets so general. We'll do the best we can, but there's some things that are just going to be general, and it's going to really limit the information you get about who's actually really doing well in practice and who isn't, who might be moving up the depth charts, who might be starting, who you didn't expect, who's going to be their starting right tackle. It looks like we won't be able to report on any of those things. So it's a big loss for Packers fans who, especially during this COVID time, we're all dying for any news and information on things that we enjoy in our hobbies or whatever, and this will be less information for people who follow the Packers closely.
As you said, Pete, we will do the best that we can. Continue to ask your questions. We will get to as many of those as we possibly can, and we'll answer them as best as we can. However, it may not be the most complete answer that perhaps you've expected over the last few days that we've been doing these live streams here at training camp. All of that being said, I would like to move on to some other news and notes coming out of camp, and also as it relates to some of the players that we were able to speak to today, especially today in particular with the tight ends. We did get to speak with tight end Robert Tonyan today. The tight ends room, as we've discussed leading up to training camp, is one filled with untapped talent, including Tonyan. Tonyan in 2019 sustained a core muscle injury in Week 5 against the Dallas Cowboys. He was able to play for 6 games following that Week 5 matchup. However, he only caught about 6 receptions. That being said, he said to the media today that he's feeling completely healthy and he's ready to go into 2020. Pete, what can a fully healthy Robert Tonyan bring to this Packers offense?
Yeah, we're all still wondering because there is ability there for sure, but it's never translated for various reasons, including the injury last year, to a lot of production on the field. He got that injury on the best play. I know he had a touchdown pass the year before, a long touchdown pass, but that play last year and that it was pretty acrobatic catch along the sidelines against Dallas, and that's the play he got hurt. Put it this way, none of the tight ends has just jumped off the field as, wow, this guy's playing great. I think back to 2010 when they designed a lot of their offense around Jermichael Finley, and he was just catching pass after pass. He ended up getting hurt that season, and not finishing, and they still won the Super Bowl. But he just jumped off the field at practice on an almost daily basis as this guy's going to have a big year. He's a big part of the offense. No one at tight end has done that yet so far in camp. Sternberger had a bad drop the other day. So did Mercedes Lewis. But there's a lot of ability there. Tanyan, I think, so is he in his third year out of college? So this should be, I mean, he should be coming into his own now, even though he's making a position transition. So this is the year for him to really do it, and he's got as good a chance as anybody over there of seeing a lot of snaps, and maybe the most snaps out of anybody by the time the season is over.
Tanyan is going into his third year with the Packers. I believe it's his
fourth year in the league.
He signed in 2017 as an undrafted free agent with the Detroit Lions. However, it's his first significant playing time, the team that he spent the longest with here with the Green Bay Packers. There's opportunity abound for everyone in the tight ends room, especially the younger players, including, as you mentioned, Jay Sternberger, 2020 draft pick Josiah DeGuara, and Tanyan, because of the departure of veteran tight end Jimmy Graham. With his departure, how does Tanyan need to perform in this camp in order to prove that he is worthy of taking some of those snaps that would have originally been for Graham?
Well, there won't be any preseason games for him to stand out in, so he's going to have to do it on the practice field. LaFleur said that as camp goes on, he's going to do some more scrimmage-type scenarios to get guys ready and to help grade players too. So he'll need to make some plays there. But just, basically day in, day out in practice, it'll help if he can block okay, because they want to use the outside zone run, and so tight ends are a big part of the outside zone blocking. But just, making plays, try to, the way guys can stand out is to make an eye-catching play, at least one a practice. That's the way guys really jump out. You can think back to Sam Shields when he was a cornerback, or any of the guys who have really won playing time in a training camp. It's almost daily. They'll do at least one thing where you go, okay, that was pretty good.
Opportunity abound for Robert Tanyan and the tight ends. We will see through camp if he is able to capitalize on that opportunity and potentially make an impression on this offense in 2020. Let's move into some of the news and notes out of training camp, specifically from today. Yesterday we talked substantially, you were not there, Pete, but we did. You can take my word for it. We talked substantially about some of the injuries that came out of camp. Today's most notable injury was to wide receiver Davante Adams. It appeared that he sustained some sort of leg injury during 11-on-11s. He went inside the Hudson Center and he was able to come back out. He did not jump back into 11-on-11s. However, he did participate in the jog through speed 11-on-11s later in practice. In addition to Adams, we saw David Bakhtiari, who also sustained a lower body injury yesterday, left tackle. He missed 11-on-11s. However, he did participate in the rest of practice. Zadarius Smith, outside linebacker, who disappeared after individual drills in practice yesterday, missed 11-on-11s, and I guess the majority of practice today. He did come back outside to observe the walkthrough toward the end of practice. And to round out the injury report, Montravius Adams, defensive lineman, was not present at practice whatsoever. Pete, how concerned should the Packers be that four pretty substantial powerhouses to their team are injured so early?
Early in camp, with the season still a few weeks away, generally speaking, as long as the injuries are minor, which we don't know for sure, as long as they are, then it shouldn't be that big of a deal. Now, the Adams injury, I did not see it. I was at the other end of the field watching the second and third teamers, who we will not name, because the starters were working at the other end. But I know that you said Adams was carted off. That's usually a bad sign.
Montravius Adams.
Yeah,
yes.
I'm sorry, Montravius
two
Adams.
Yeah.
So that's not a good sign. So that could be a longer-term injury. Davante Adams coming back and being on the practice field after the injury, he did the jog-through stuff. But you never know. It's not uncommon for guys you see him kind of come up a little lame in the practice, and they finish the practice, but then the next day they're not on the practice field, and who knows how long he would be out. But it did not look serious for sure. And Zadarius Smith, as you said, he was back on the practice field at the end watching the jog through. So the injuries don't look serious except for maybe Montravius Adams. And those, he's the least important of those players. So At this early juncture, it wouldn't be a big concern unless, and they know more about obviously about the injuries than we do, unless it's something more serious to one of those guys. Zadarius Smith is their best guy on defense. They surely cannot afford to lose him.
The only other update that I can provide is that the NFL Network yesterday said that Montravius Adams' injury is a toe sprain, and it's not thought to be serious. So we have not been able to confirm that. However, if that's true, then that is relatively good news.
I believe the toe sprain part, the reports almost always come with not believed to be serious, and that's sometimes not always right. So we'll see on that. A sprained toe can be a really bad injury. That's a turf toe, and those can keep you out for quite a while, as we've seen.
If and when we see any of these Packers return to practice, we will surely let you all know. Yesterday's practice, the Packers were in pads for the first time in 2020. Today, again, the Packers were in pads. However, it looked a little bit different. About midway through the practice, the Packers took off all of their uppers and they did a jog through 11 on 11. Head coach Matt LaFleur said to expect more of these half-padded practices. He said that he won't be utilizing all 14 of the padded practices that the NFL is allowing its teams to have. Pete, what is the advantage for head coach Matt LaFleur to not have his team in pads for the full allotted time?
You know, it's all part of what he did last year, too, where less is more. He's definitely skews toward the less is more end of the coaching scale as far as time spent on the practice field, time spent in pads even. And it showed up last year, you have to think, in how injury-free they were, generally speaking. I've been covering since '93. I've been covering this team. That definitely, I would think that was definitely in the top 5 of the least injured seasons they've had, maybe top 3. So it makes it. I'm sure it makes a difference. I know he thinks it makes a difference, and so it's all part of that thinking. He tries to get as much work in as he can in as short amount of time to keep players off the field. They went. Today was their 3rd straight day, 2nd straight day in pads, so they went short in pads. Tomorrow will be their 4th straight practice. I think it's pretty rare in training camp to have 4 straight days of practice. I don't remember them doing that at all last year because they also had games mixed in. So I think he's just playing this as he has in the past. He's been going shorter than the allotted time too. He could have gone 90 minutes the first day. I think he went about 70, and he's been keeping practice 10 to 20 minutes shorter than the allotted time that the league has been giving.
All of these practices so far have been right behind us here at Ray Nitschke Field. However, tomorrow, practice is going to be at Lambo Field. The Packers haven't been inside for any sort of real action since January in that NFC divisional game against the Seattle Seahawks. However, they have been doing some walkthroughs inside of Lambeau Field. Pete, why is head coach Matt LaFleur electing to move practice inside to Lambeau?
The reasons he gave were to get guys used to playing in a stadium because they're not going to have preseason games, and to get used to playing in a stadium without fans in it. That was basically the gist of it, unless, do you remember anything else about it?
No, just get used to it, no crowd noise, getting used to an empty Lambeau Field.
I'll be interested too. He said he'll be interested to find out what the league allows for piped in noise. It's hard to tell watching the NBA and Major League games how loud it is, but even the piped in noise from a TV viewer, it helps some. The one thing is, I'm sure the league will place limits on how loud it can be, so whether it'll affect the offensive cadence and whether they have to go to silent count for a road team, will they be able to turn up the noise so loud that they'll have to do that? That I don't know. I guess if I had to guess, they wouldn't allow that, but you never know. Maybe they'll try to preserve some of the home field advantage by allowing a fairly high decibel level.
Still surreal to think that the Packers won't be having any home fans, at least for the first couple of games of the regular season inside of Lambeau Field. It's going to be an advantage to the teams that can figure out how to work around it and how to adjust and communicate well without any fans in the stadium. I think it'll be interesting to see.
And be able to generate your own juice is the word they use, their own excitement. And, they do it in practice. They're playing football in practice, and there's, plenty of, we've seen fights out here before, nothing this year yet, but they practice hard. So I would think once you start competing on game day, I would still think wouldn't be that hard to raise the energy level. You get beat once on a play, I think that'll provide some juice for some players.
We'll see if the Packers can bring their own juice at least tomorrow inside of Lambo for their first practice in the stadium. Let's get into some of our questions from our lovely viewers. Thanks everybody for joining us today. We'll start with Owen. Owen asks, why did the Packers release wide receiver Travis Fulgum? The Packers released both Fulgum and another Travis, offensive tackle Travis Bruffy, today. They were not present in practice simply because they were bringing players off of COVID-19 reserve. Both long snapper Hunter Bradley and outside linebacker Greg Roberts today came off of the COVID-19 list, which means that they no longer have any players on COVID-19. Unfortunately, that meant for Travis Bruffy and Travis Fulgum, bad day to be named Travis, that meant that they needed to leave and make some space on that roster. What wasn't Fulgum able to show in the very short window that he had here with the Packers?
I can't claim to really know. We've seen practice, but you can't watch everybody all the time, and you can't even come close to that. You can only watch one or two things on any given play. So I don't know, but he obviously was at the bottom of the pecking order. I guess we can safely say that he was at the bottom of the depth chart.
I guess
he's
if
no
he
longer
got
on
cut.
the team. Yes.
Sure. Why not? So yes, both Travis Fulgum and Travis Bruffy are no longer with the Packers. Worth mentioning though, outside linebacker Greg Roberts, although he was taken off of COVID reserve, he is now on physically unable to perform. So he is not close to seeing any action, at least anytime soon. At the moment, the Packers roster stands at 79, so they have a little bit of room.
I think I was just discussing this with our colleague Ryan Wood just before we came on. If I remember right, so if you're on the COVID list, you do not count against the 80. I think if you're on PUP, you count against the 80, but when the season starts, if you're still on PUP, they can keep you there and you would not count on the 53. So I think they actually are at 80, and that's why they had to cut two guys today.
Okay, good for me to know. I appreciate it.
These rules get a little arcane, that's for sure.
There's a lot of moving around going on. It's good to know these things and some of these new rules as well with COVID-19 reserve. Let's move into Tony's question. Tony asks, how had defensive lineman Montravius Adams looked up until he was injured? Montravius Adams was a player that Mike Pettin touted pretty highly coming out of training camp last season, had high expectations for him going into 2019. However, his defensive snap count dropped off about halfway through the season, and he didn't seem to make much of an impact on the defense, much at all. What is happening? What's going on there with Montravius Adams?
They still seem to think really highly of his talent. I mean, they spent a third-round pick on him a few years ago, so they obviously thought highly of him. Pettin talked last year in the offseason, and he thought he was the most improved guy in the defense. And as you said, looked okay in camp, but as the season wore on, less and less playing time. So really with him, and he's looked okay in camp. I mean, they were playing him a lot, and he was, he'd make a play or two, he'd at least get in the backfield or get a decent pass rush. I can't say that he just jumped off the field as a guy was like, wow, he is playing great. But the test for him is to not just make the team, but to be a guy who's playing a lot and making some plays in November and December, and not to have his playing time dwindle as it has the last couple of years.
Yeah, no, big opportunity now or never for Montravius Adams. Let us take another question here from John. Not a question, more of a statement. John says, tight ends are going to play a big role this year. We know head coach Matt LaFleur likes to use his tight ends in a number of different ways. LaFleur, early in his tenure here in Green Bay, used the phrase illusion of complexity to describe his offense. And the tight ends, their role, they fit in well to providing that illusion of complexity, whether they're lining up as blockers or they're being split out as receivers. What role can the tight ends play in the Packers offense this season?
Really big. And, I think one of the things that he would like about them is they're not, if you have a tight end who's a decent blocker at least and a pretty good receiver, they're not a tip-off to what the play call is likely to be. So if a guy's a good inline tight end, you can line him up there, and you can run a play action pass, fake outside zone, and it'll look just the same to the defense, and they'll have to honor the run a little more, which is always helpful in the passing game for giving the quarterback a little more time, maybe giving a receiver a little more time to get open, maybe even getting that tight end open if he fakes a block and then goes out.
Yeah, potentially can be important weapons in the Packers offense. We'll see exactly how Matt LaFleur chooses to utilize his tight ends as we get closer to the start of the regular season. Let's take another question here from Tony, kind of in line of what we were talking about earlier, Pete, with lack of fans in Lambeau Field. He asks, with no fans, what happens with home field advantage and noise impact, specifically when it comes to communication on the field? The offense may be at an advantage because they'll be able to hear each other a little bit easier. They won't have to go into a silent count for whatever reason. However, it also means that the defense can hear the offense and what they're communicating, and they watch that stuff on film all the time. So how is this going to impact both the offense and the defense from a communication standpoint?
It's teams work in the past. The Packers have always practiced against noise. Even in the offseason, they started doing it. Teams seem to operate pretty well. They've learned to operate pretty well on the silent count. I think this will really affect every team playing a home game, but it'll really affect the Seahawks and the Vikings and the Saints and the teams that play in these especially loud venues where their defense always picks up a really big edge. They're definitely louder than Lambeau Field is. So maybe they might lose a little bit of their home field advantage because of that, assuming the league doesn't let teams just jack up the decibels on whatever ambient noise they're allowed to pump in.
We'll have to see. I'm curious to see if it's going to sound like a video game, like it's going to sound like Madden a little bit, or if someone's going to have a job that's sort of orchestrating Madden-like sounds inside of a Lambeau Stadium. It's kind of like how it is with the NBA and the MLB.
I'm just going to come out and say it. I've never played Madden, so I have no idea what it sounds like.
All right, well then Pete can't answer that exactly, but hopefully we'll have some more insight for you as we get closer to the start of the season and we have a better understanding of what simulated crowd noise is going to sound like inside of an NFL stadium. Let us move on to Tommy. Tommy asks if the Packers would be interested in trading for Carolina wide receiver Curtis Samuel with any trade, specifically at the wide receivers position. The Packers, both general manager Brian Gutekunst, head coach Matt LaFleur, have said that they're confident in the receivers that they have in that room, despite Davante Adams being the clear number one and everyone else behind him, Allen Lazard the probable number two. However, everybody else seems to be a fair game for who can step up and contribute to have an opportunity in this offense. What would it take for the Packers to initiate a trade, look for outside help at wide receiver?
That Samuel's interesting because if you go back to even last season near the trade deadline, his name came up. I don't know that there were no reports of serious discussions between the Packers and Carolina about Samuels. It was just a name of a guy who was a really high pick and a talented guy who was hardly playing at all for the team he was with, and he was, I think, in his second season last year. And so it was one of those trades that reporters would bring up saying this would make sense, or pundits, that this would make sense that these teams would want to do a deal. Same thing through this offseason. So it's an interesting guy to bring up, and it sounds plausible. He's more of a slot type guy, which they really don't have. He's a speed guy, which they're lacking dynamism at receiver. So it would make a lot of sense. The question is, what would it take to get him? He's a former first-round pick. He hasn't done anything. So if I'm the Packers, I would think I would give up a 4 for him, but would Carolina take a 4 for him? That's one of the major questions.
It's a question, and unfortunately, we are not general manager Brian Gutekunst, and we are not in any position to be making trades, so we don't have a good answer for you, but it's certainly something to keep in mind going forward as we progress through camp if the Packers are interested in acquiring some talent from the outside world. Let's move to Paul's question. Paul asks, how has rookie quarterback Jordan Love looked? Head coach Matt LaFleur has said multiple times, he said once specifically, that Love might be swimming a little bit in all of the new information that's coming at him in this very short period of time here in training camp. He didn't have rookie camp. He's not going to have any preseason games to show himself in. He's learning how the footwork should look at the NFL level. He's learning a lot that he didn't get to do in college coming into the professional level. What has your evaluation been of Love in a short period of time?
You know, it's not like we've gotten a real long look at them. They're trying to get their starters ready. They're working them, you know, way more than everybody else. Just quick thumbnail impression. You can definitely see the arm talent. He throws the ball real easily and smoothly, and you can see that he can zip it. You can just see a lot of arm talent. I guess the thing with the arm talent that's jumped out a little bit to me is he looks like he can throw with touch already. I think back to when Brett Favre was a rookie, was early in his career. All he did was throw fastballs. I mean, he did not have much of a touch. Love break the pocket, and he'll try those touch passes going over the top on a guy coming out of the backfield, for instance. So he appears to have that. But, you know, basically the consensus among the handful of people around the league who I talked to about Love, who are evaluators, either quarterback evaluators or evaluators of all positions, it was unanimous that this was a guy who needed some time to work. So this is at least a couple-year project for getting him ready to play, meaning at bare minimum, he's going to need this year just to get his feet wet and to get a feel. No off season. That's a guy who that we had this year. That's a guy who that's going to hurt because he sure could have used a lot of snaps in OTAs. So it's tough to say much more than that. He threw an interception. He almost had an interception on another play where he threw down the middle late, which is a cardinal sin for quarterbacks in the NFL. But you definitely can see the arm talent. There's no getting around that.
It's a challenging season to be a rookie, an undrafted free agent. It's just there's not a lot of time to develop and learn. Luckily, he has some other quarterbacks in that room to learn from. So we'll continue to see how Jordan Love evaluates through continue to see how he develops through training camp. Let's move to Carolyn's question, a little behind-the-scenes media life question. Carolyn asks, how do the Packers choose which players will be made available to the media? It's a great question, and quite frankly, it's a question that I myself have. In theory, I think we can request certain players. It's not a guaranteed if we will get certain players. However, we will take what we can get. Pete, what is your understanding of how this works?
I have no idea how they're making these decisions. I know they've had a lot of requests for Love from at least a few reporters. They've waited, but now I think we do get him tomorrow. Mm-hmm. Yes, amongst the players we get tomorrow. They made sure they did Rodgers on the first day, which is, that's the quarterback is always available in the locker room on the first day. But other than that, I really don't know. It seemed like in the first few days they were trying to get some of the bigger name guys. If they did 3 guys, at least one of them was a bigger name guy. But I have no idea how they're actually making these decisions.
It's a good question.
Yep.
wish we had more answers. Good news is, as you mentioned, we will get to hear from Jordan Love tomorrow, in addition to running back A.J. Dillon and tight end / H-back Josiah DeGuara. So all 3 of their top draft picks from 2020, who we haven't heard from since the night of the draft.
That's a long time ago.
They have aged many years since the night of the draft. They've learned a lot. Hopefully we'll get to pick their brains a little bit tomorrow about how their acclimation has gone to the pro level.
Yeah, there would have been a lot of stories on those guys in May and June during the OTAs and mini camps if they had them, but they hadn't. So those will be some stories that you can look forward to reading over the next few days.
Absolutely. It'll be a busy day tomorrow over on PackersNews.com. It's already busy right now. We have lots of content over for you to check out there. Check us out, PackersNews.com. Also, make sure you're following us on our social media platforms on Facebook, Periscope, YouTube, the good old Instagram as well. I think that's just about everything. I think we covered as much as we possibly can without revealing anything. We will be back tomorrow right here, same time, same place, with another live stream. I believe my guest will be Ryan Wood. So if you didn't get to ask a question today, I encourage you, come back tomorrow. We will get to your question then. For Pete,